Hey everyone, this is Andy Majeka here, otherwise known as Andy the Game Maker, with another episode of Fun and Victorious. First of all, thank you for dropping by and watching my video on my channel. For those who haven't already watched previously, I had the last episode I did was on Akira Kurosawa and his influence on the Star Wars franchise. I've had a lot of fun discussing that and sharing that with you. So if you're interested, please be sure to go back and watch that video. And if leave a comment if you don't mind. Leave a comment on this video too. And be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so that way you are keeping up to date with all my videos from here on out. So today it's going to be a very fun discussion. We're going to be talking about the Stag, specifically with Harry Potter's Patronus and the Jaegers from Pacific Rim. So I'm a person who's really obsessed with symbols in anything that I read, or watch for that matter, whether it's movies, TV shows, or even books. I'm always questioning just why is this symbol in here specifically, and I've done a lot of research over the past years, and it's something I always think about, because I know when people make these stories, they write these stories, they come up with these films, they're putting stuff in there deliberately. So the question is, what does it mean? Why is it in there? And so that's what this conversation is about here today. So here's an overview of what we're going to be doing. For today, we're going to go over the origins of the Stag. I'm going to share some instances where I've discovered it in pop culture, but then we're going to go into Harry Potter, the Prisoner of Azkaban, as well as Pacific Rim, and then I'm going to close up with some recommendations for the day. Alright, so the origins of the Stag. When I first did some research on this, I was wondering what I would find. I was kind of expecting that it would just be one simple definition of what the Stag means, like from a mythological perspective, but I didn't realize that how many people had adopted the Stag. As you can see there's been 12 different cultures that have adopted some form of deer to help tell a story, and it dates as far back as 4th century BC. And the symbol is varied in terms of how it's been used, whether it's been a transformation curse, a disguise, a helper, a talking animal who gives the hero with a MacGuffin, which, by the way, is just an object to help move the story along. You'll hear that a lot. This probably won't be the last time you ever hear me use that, which is like, for example, the ring, Lord of the Rings, that's a MacGuffin. The Tesseract in Avengers doesn't really mean too much. It's just there to push the story along. Anyways, and then the last example that I found was a disguised adversary, which is something that's been, the deer has been used for, I should say. Okay, so pop culture. I drew from memory several instances where I saw a stag being used specifically, and it's just kind of remarkable just to see it come up like that, and people put it in there deliberately for whatever reason. And although I didn't, originally when I wanted to make this video, I wanted to talk about Skyfall and Game of Thrones, but it was going to be a long video. I wanted to keep it fairly short, so that's why today we're only going to be focusing on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, as well as Pacific Rim. But I do want to talk about Skyfall and Game of Thrones, so there will be a follow-on video to this. Alright, so Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Personally, it's my favorite of all the Harry Potter movies. I didn't honestly read the book, but I was very much familiar with the film, so I'm actually going to be referencing more of the film than the story itself. But anyways, so it's the third story in the Harry Potter saga. This is really unique because Sirius Black is introduced in the storyline, who we eventually learn is Harry Potter's godfather. And this is also where Harry first interacts with the Dementors and learns how to use the Patronus charm. And those two are very much opposed to one another, so I'm going to go into explain what the Dementors are and then what the Patronus is, and just kind of putting two and two together. So to rehash the story, I put the synopsis here. And after serving a lengthy sentence for the murder of Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black escapes a prison called Azkaban after learning about evidence that suggests Pettigrew is actually alive at Hogwarts. As Black sets forth to pursue the truth, the Mentors have been sent to Hogwarts with the intent of detaining Black and sending him to Azkaban, all amidst the hysteria that Black has actually set forth to kill Harry Potter. So that's the synopsis of the story. So the Dementors. Okay, what are the Dementors? And the Dementors are not what kept or terrified Prison Mike from The Office. Michael Scott's fake persona that he creates to teach people about how hard prison is. But anyways, so the Dementors are, as you can see here, soulless creatures, among the foulest beings on Earth, a phantom species who, as their name suggests, gradually deprive human minds of happiness and intelligence. They are the guards of the wizard prison Azkaban, until after the return of the antagonist Lord Voldemort, who he basically just wants to, he cannibalizes them in a way and just uses them for other purposes. And anyways, and the Dementors suck souls of its victims via the Dementor's kiss, and you see that a couple times in the movie where Harry Potter's soul is getting sucked out, and it's really, really terrifying creatures. So, interesting fact when I was doing this research, by the way, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling has suggested that she created the Dementors when she was diagnosed as clinically depressed, and really unfortunate that she found herself in that position. But it's the beautiful part about that, if there's any silver lining to being depressed in this instance, is that's how what gave her inspiration to come up with the Dementors, and they're very effective in telling the story. All right, so moving on to the Patronus. What is a Patronus? Okay, so the Patronus charm is a defensive spell that produces a silver animal guardian used to protect a witch or wizard against Dementors. And as you can see here, I have this quote here from Remus Lupin, and it says, "The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, and the desire to survive." And if we just think about this, like, it's very, very much on the opposite end of what the Dementors are, and they're all about, again, just basically sucking you of your happiness and intelligence, and just there to instill fear. So that, whereas the Patronus is like the opposite of that. It's helped give you courage in that moment, basically, and just the willingness to overcome whatever it is that's ahead of you. And so this, which leads us to Harry Potter's Patronus, the Stag. Okay, and then this is something we see later on in other films where people create their own Patronuses, and they're always different animals. As a matter of fact, you can go to pottermore.com. I'll put the link in the description of this video, but basically you can go there and you can actually see what your Patronus is. And as a matter of fact, this is where this graphic comes from. It's from the website, and you can help to discover what your Patronus is. So anyways, so in this story, Harry Potter deploys the Patronus at the climax of the story to save Sirius Black from the Dementors. His efforts don't exactly work at first, and that's when he sees the glowing white stag across the lake just in time to save him. And then he sees the stag, and he mistakes it for his father deploying the Patronus. Although he doesn't see his father there, he sees someone in the dark and someone deploying the Patronus, because that was actually his father's Patronus, or his Animagus. And that's something that comes up too in this story as well, with these Animagus characters, where you have Sirius Black, who turns into a black wolf. You have Remus Lupin, who turns into a werewolf, which is kind of a curse. And then obviously Peter Pettigrew, his Animagus is a rat, which is why he's Ron Weasley's pet, Scabbers. And then we also learned that this is James Potter's Animagus was a stag, which is also why Harry thinks it's so. But anyway, so as I mentioned, so why a stag? So right there, boom, James Potter's Animagus was a stag, and there's that symbolic connection between Harry and his father, James. And what I also think is rather interesting is with respect to some of the research that I found. So I came across a lot of information about the stag, and the one thing that stood out the most as far as the different myths were the insular Celtics, and they had supernatural or deified deer, and specifically the old woman of bear, the Cailleach Beara, I think is how you pronounce it. So anyways, per insular Celtic lore, there are stories of supernatural deer who are associated with a spiritual figure, and spirits or deities who may take the form of deer. In Ireland, the Cailleach Beara, who lives on an island off the coast of County Cork, takes the form of a deer to avoid capture, which is what we see here in this video, or this film, or in the story, I should say. That's what's taking place. Is the Patronus is being used to basically evade the Dementors, keep them away, keep them at bay. And so anyways, the old woman of bear, she takes the form of the deer to avoid capture, and herds her deer by the shore to basically protect them. And then the Beara Peninsula, which is where that takes place, the myth takes place, is also associated with the islands in the Western Sea that are the lands of the dead. And this is especially obvious given the locale, the finale, and the deadly nature of the Dementors. So it just all these pieces together just really paint a really, really strong picture with respect to what's happening in that specific moment too, which is really fun. And this is not to say that this is what what specifically J.K. Rowling had in mind when she wrote this specific scene, the idea of the stag. This is just something that I noticed, which I find very, very interesting. There's a lot of strong connections between the two, and I think given her geographic location, just where she's from, her being from the UK, I would not be surprised if this is a good piece of inspiration to help come up with this specific story element. So what does this say about Harry Potter? Okay, so the stag is a powerful symbol that defines Harry as a wizard. I think that's one of the things that we can take away from this. But it's also a reflection of Harry's confidence in himself. And it's a symbol of Harry's strength and belief in himself, a symbol that materializes in a moment when Harry sees the potential in himself to do so. Had he not traveled back in time, he would not have been able to accomplish this ability. Through Harry's hope, happiness, and desire to survive, he was able to do all this. He saw what it took to not only protect himself, but the closest living representation of his parents, which is Sirius Black. And it's almost as if James Potter himself came from the great beyond in order to help Harry do all this. Something James had failed to do when Harry was still alive. So James was not able to assist Harry or save Harry from Voldemort. Obviously, his parents died in the process. But again, it's like that. It's almost like that comeback where it's like I couldn't do it then, but I can do it now moment, which is pretty neat. So that's basically how I summarize the stag for Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Moving on to Pacific Rim. So I recommend this film. It's going to come up with my recommendations later. So Pacific Rim was released in 2013. It's directed by Guillermo del Toro. I really enjoy this film. It's really unfortunate that it didn't do so well at the box office, as you can see there. And for those who weren't familiar, there's a very simple way to calculate how well a film does in the box office. And basically what you do is you 2x the budget. You multiply the budget by 2. The budget of the film was around 180 to $200 million. And basically, and that you say 2x because the amount of money they spend on the budget, they spend a similar amount of money on marketing for that movie. So if you can't at least get double the budget, then you're basically not a success, or more than. I mean, it's got to be more than double, because businesses can't grow when you just get the money you put back into it, because it's not sustainable. So they barely got 11 million off this film, which isn't much. I mean, if you think about it, that's just one weekend. That's one weekend at the box office, basically, in comparison. So, like Man of Steel, for example, it was budget $250 million, pulled in $668 million. So it's mildly successful. But then Avengers Endgame, this is a good comparison. So the budget was $356 million. It was able to pull in $2.7 billion. So that's like more than 8 times the initial budget. So, or 2x. So it's like, we'll say 700 million roughly. That's the number you work with, and so that's times 4 roughly. Yeah, so it's 4x that number. So that's really good. That's a really good number. Okay, but anyways, Pacific Rim. In the face of certain extinction, the world unites to take on the kaiju, space monsters who have established a presence on Earth ever since the Breach first appeared years earlier. In order to defeat the kaiju, humans had to consolidate resources in order to create monsters of their own, the Jaegers. The story follows Jaeger co-pilot Riley Beckett as he is called back into service to pilot Gypsy Danger. Really fun film. I really enjoyed it. I think of it as not to sound disparaging of Michael Bay and the Transformers films, but it's a smarter Transformers film. I think it's made better. I think you can actually tell what's going on. I enjoyed the first Transformers film, but I mean, beyond that, they were all just felt like product placement movies. That's all they were doing. Is that's what fueled the budget for those movies. I think those movies, when they're made, they're typically catered to international box office, and which is why in the U.S. they don't really do all that well, because that's just the mentality, I think, from my understanding. I'd love to hear comments on that, by the way, if I'm wrong or if you disagree. But basically, that's a huge reason why you end up with a movie that you get. It's because of the way they told that story away, because they felt it would be a better appeal to the foreign box office. So, but anyways, I really like this film. I think it's great. I think it's a lot of fun. Guillermo del Toro is a fan of this genre of film, so which I will get into here in just a sec. All right, so Jaegers versus kaiju. This is what's flashed on the screen when you first watch the film. So you have kaiju, which means giant beast. If you look up the actual definition of kaiju on Google, it actually comes up with something else. If you go to translate.google.com, it'll say dispel, which I find very interesting because I think that's describing basically the activity of the consequence of the kaiju, which is people dispelling, dispersing, spreading out, running, more or less. But it's actually, giant beast is actually not far from the way it's used, and it's kaiju is actually the film genre, which I didn't realize until I did this research. And these are some of the themes that we find. It's infused post-atomic, post-nuclear war themes, which explains like when like Godzilla came out, for example. They always talked about, post-nuclear war, atomic war, if you will. And then, which is interesting because if you put this in the context of Pacific Rim, that's why I have this note here. Marshall Stacker Pentecost, Idris Elba's character, we learned that he has like form of radiation sicknesses, like nose is bleeding periodically, and eventually he just takes a sacrifice and just towards the end of the film, not to give too much away. And then, but anyways, and then there's obviously the word Jaeger, which is German for hunter, and I'll get into the German definition here in just a second. And then I'll just wrap up here by saying the kaiju have always been antagonistic, protagonistic, ambiguous force in nature. That's the way the last God's not the King of the Monsters Godzilla. I haven't seen that one, but the one before that, I'm referencing that one just because I've seen that one, the one with Bryan Cranston. That one, Godzilla is actually protagonistic in that one. But more importantly, they're pre-eternal creatures of divine power. And I also said this note right here, Mecha Kaiju, which is like the blending of the two, which you have like Kaiju Kong, and it's like King Kong, but like he's he's a robot King Kong, I think I might have that wrong. It might even be Mecha Kong, but and then there's obviously Mecha Godzilla, which is like a robot Godzilla, which is really interesting, really fun. So moving into it, Jaegers. Okay, German for hunter. Yes, that's actually what it means. And people are like, for the alcoholics out there, and I say that jokingly, of course. I hope no one's really an alcoholic or considers themselves an alcoholic for immediately thinking about Jägermeister. But Jägermeister actually means master hunter. And so I did some research into this, and I didn't realize that the company is named after the patron saint of hunting, which is Saint Hubertus. And he's not only just a patron saint of hunters, he's a patron saint of mathematicians, opticians, metalworkers, and anyways, and so the quote that they use is the stag that appeared to a wild hunter and converted him to Christianity. And the story behind Saint Hubertus is this right here, which is in the story of Saint Hubertus. On Good Friday morning, when the faithful were crowding the churches, Hubertus sallied forth to the chase. As he was pursuing a magnificent stag, the animal turned, and as the pious legend narrates, he was astounded at perceiving a crucifix standing between its antlers, which occasioned the change of heart. That led him to a saintly life, which is why we see the cross in the logo right there with a bright light. And it's a very popular logo. It really paints a picture as to what this is about. It's a celebration of Saint Hubertus and what he represents and all that he is. So how that actually ties to the flavor of the alcohol, I have no idea. But that's just the company and something that they want to do with their business, which is fine. So. And if you know the answer to that question, please feel free to drop in the comment section. I would love to hear some feedback on that. So, why is the Saint Hubertus reference? I should say, why is Saint Hubertus? I guess you could say the Saint Hubertus. Anyways, why is Saint Hubertus or the Saint Hubertus reference fitting for Pacific Rim? I actually wrote that correctly. Anyways, making fun of myself. All right, so I had this quote here from the movie, which I think is really good, and it really sums up or really builds into the reasoning for this. And so there are things you can't fight, acts of God. You see a hurricane coming, you get out of the way, but when you're in a Jaeger, suddenly you can fight the hurricane, you can win. And that's Riley Beckett's quote, which is in the beginning of the film. And what I think is really great about this is, I think this is a very fitting definition or fitting reference for a couple different reasons. And one that is that, so Saint Hubertus is basically or I'm sorry, the Jaegers are just a really great reinvention of what he represents. As I mentioned, he's patron saint not only hunters, Jaegers are hunting the kaiju, but mathematicians, opticians, and metal workers. And that's, when you look at the Jaegers, that's what they basically are. It's like the summation of all that. Maybe not so much the opticians, because that's like glasses, right? But I guess you could say just, having the optical technology to go in there and utilize that stuff. I think it's a very fitting reference. I had some fun here with the logo, because this is one of my favorite scene in the film, when Gypsy Danger shows up to save Eureka Stryker, and it's a really fun moment. It's very dramatic and exciting. He shows up and being carried by all these helicopters, and it's a ton of fun. It's a really fun scene, and always gets me riled. It gets my goosebumps going, which I think is great. So be sure to make fun of me if you want to. I don't care. I really love it. But I find that very fitting. And then, not to mention, combining Riley Beckett with Saint Hubertus, in that moment, he kind of elevated himself to living a more saintly life, if you will. And Riley Beckett, while he's not aristocratic the way Saint Hubertus was when he was alive, that's one of the comments about him. Riley Beckett, he's just a pilot, and what he says about himself in the film is like, I wasn't anything special, but the one thing that made me special basically was just being his connection with his brother. Because it takes two people to pilot the Jaegers, and because the two of them had such a strong, we're drift compatible, I believe is the phrase they use in the movie. The two of them can do that, and then because of that, they're kind of like elevated to this godly status, if you will, to be able to command these, to command the Jaegers and pilot them, if you will. So in that regard, I find that fitting. And then, not to mention, I had this image of the breach there, which they say, we always thought the aliens would come from, extraterrestrials would come from the stars above, when they actually came from below. And it kind of reminds me of hell. So you have that hell reference too as well. So these are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your take on that too. But moving forward, though, when I was looking into this, I actually thought about Prisoner of Azkaban, and it's made me wonder, so why is the St. Hubertus reference fitting for Harry Potter? And again, kind of the story with St. Hubertus, he's out in the woods, Harry sees the Patronus in the woods, which is kind of neat, and it's kind of got that similar light glow that he had, and the stag is a symbol of hope, faith, and growth, which is what we have, what Harry experiences in that moment. And then, again, kind of like Riley Beckett, it's a moment which elevates Harry Potter forward. And excuse me. But anyways, Harry grows from the moment is what I'm trying to say. And then this one is where it really hits home. I guess St. Hubertus is the patron saint of opticians, and James and Harry both happen to wear glasses, which I think is, I don't think it goes much beyond that from a surface perspective, but I think it still adds to the image. So. And anyways, recommendations. So again, thanks for dropping by today. So my recommendations for you today are, if you haven't seen Prisoner of Azkaban, I prefer it. It's my favorite of all the Harry Potter films. And if you haven't seen the first two, go watch the first two. I think those two are great. Directed by Christopher Columbus, by the way, the first two. For those of you who've seen The Goonies and Home Alone, it's the same guy who made those films, which I think is fantastic. And John Williams did the score for Home Alone 2 as well. So I think he might have done Goonies. I have to go back and look. If you know the answer, feel free to drop it in. And then Pacific Rim 2. Really fun films are all around. And then music recommendations too, because I love John Williams, a big John Williams fan. So check out the score for Prisoner of Azkaban. But then also Pacific Rim. Another reason why I enjoy Pacific Rim, because it has a really strong score. I actually listen to Pacific Rim sometimes whenever I'm in the gym lifting heavy weights. And what's really fun about it is, another fun little fact about the score is, not only is it made by Ramin Djawadi, who did Game of Thrones, he did Westworld, he's done a lot of things, but he actually invited Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine to do the guitar music, who also worked with Ramin Djawadi on Iron Man. The very first Iron Man film, and Tom Morello did the music there too. He actually has a cameo in the film, and when we first see the Mach 1 Iron Man first light up and escape from the cave, and he actually beats up Tom Morello, which is actually really funny to see him in there. And then lastly, a fun recommendation I would love to do a review on this film, but anyways, Atlantic Rim, which is it's a knockoff of Pacific Rim, which is this is an Asylum film, as they call it. Asylum is the name of the film company. that makes all these knockoff films. They made a film called Transmorphers, which is a knockoff of Transformers. There's a bunch. I think they made one called Sharktoctopus, which is a knockoff of Sharknado. So this is fun. I would love to hear comments on Atlantic Rim if you've seen it before. Feel free to leave comments on that. I really, would appreciate it. And lastly, if you want to support my channel, please feel free to go to my website, andythegamemaker.com. You can donate or you can buy a copy of my game, Crypto Cartel, which is on my website. So feel free to check that out there. I also have coffee too. If you're a coffee drinker, it's really great. It's made by a company out in Virginia called Brass Bullet Coffee Company. Previously called Rick Roasters. Great company all around, veteran owned. So if you'd like, feel free to, you want to support me, feel free to buy, a copy of my game or coffee, or even just donate to my website. So again, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to linking up again for my next video. See ya.